All right, it's 5 o'clock on the last day of the conference, and as if that was not enough impetus to not actually be here, it's also the start of Game 1 of the World Series. So if you actually make it to the end of this, I might actually decide that I need to thank each and every one of you personally and walk around and shake your hand. So thank you for spending your time here. This is Curing Cancer with HTML5. As I said 5 minutes ago, we're not actually curing cancer with HTML5. HTML5 will not cure cancer. I will not cure cancer. And this talk isn't even really about oncology. It is about search. And the obvious question then is, why does it have the title that it has? The answer is because when I put in my talk proposal to HTML5 DevConf, I was in a rush. Where I work, some of our researchers are in fact trying to cure cancer. And they use some of our tools, so boom, there's my talk title. I'll figure out what I'm actually going to speak about later. So sorry, everyone. Next time I'll try to do a lot better with my title. So as I said, I work for, well, I don't know if I said it, but now I'm going to say it. I work for the University of California, San Francisco. It's a health sciences institution. That means we have a hospital, we have tons of researchers, we have no undergraduates, we don't have any sports teams, we don't have any liberal arts programs, we don't have a computer science program. And we have dozens and dozens of online resources for researchers and students to use, clinicians, educators, and so on and so forth. And each one of these online resources seems to have its own search tool. But users really shouldn't be asked to search in a dozen or 2 dozen different interfaces just to find what they're looking for. So the typical solution for this is what's called federated search. And one of the resources that some of our researchers use is something that we curate and publish ourselves called the Legacy Tobacco Documents Library. It's this really awesome collection of literally millions of internal tobacco industry documents. And originally, this talk was going to be about that site because last year we started a user-centered redesign for the site, and we did tons of user research and found out what was working and what wasn't. So basically, I was going to drag our UX developer on stage and have her present all of her findings and everything. Turns out she has crippling stage fright. So it's just me. And I like UX stuff, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that, but I also like code, and I spend a lot more time with code, so there's going to be some code. Anyway, as it turns out, our federated search suffered from a lot of the same things that the tobacco documents site problems that it suffered from. So it's time to do something about it. Now again, this talk was originally going to be about that tobacco document site. And I had included an amazing 30-second Camel cigarettes commercial called "What Cigarette Do You Smoke, Doctor?" And I had included a letter signed by Sylvester Stallone agreeing to be paid $500,000 to smoke Brown & Williamson tobacco products in 5 feature films. And I was going to talk about the overwhelming amount of metadata, like basically, you could tell that the user interface was designed by programmers to a large extent because you search for some things and you get a result and you get this vast amount of metadata, including something called a Bates number, and I swear I'm not making this up, a master Bates number. Now, given that, you might be inclined to think that maybe we didn't really think through everything on the user experience front when we initially designed the thing. So anyway, this talk was going to be hilarious and entertaining and fabulous, and I junked it all in the last 48 hours to focus on federated search instead. So the talk is a lot more narrowly focused. It's also a lot more pragmatic. So anyway, back to federated search. There are at least 3 ways to pull stuff into your federated search from things that want to cooperate only to limited extents. So one is, if the content provider has an API that you can query to get the content. API is all the hotness now, but the truth is that this almost never happens. Often what you and I consider an API is not what the content provider considers an API. A lot of the APIs that we deal with are script tags that you put on your page and it creates a little widget for you or something, and that's not really what we need. But if an API is available, that's your first choice, clearly. The second best option is straightforward, grab the HTML and scrape the information out of it. We all know that this is really brittle. As soon as the HTML changes on the content provider side, it breaks your scraper, and you have to go in, and heaven help you if your scraping rules are hard-coded in your enterprise Java application. You have to regenerate a WAR file and deploy it on your Tomcat server to make it work again. However, scraping has two huge upsides. One is that it usually works well enough, and it's certainly better than the alternative, which is nothing. And second of all, it usually is easy and fast to implement. So the third and least desirable thing to deal with are the web new.o sites where everything is generated with Angular or Ember or Backbone or whatever, but there's no content there that you can actually, that's actually served by the HTML. You have to execute a bunch of JavaScript. So if you want to scrape that stuff, you have to make friends with headless browsers like, say, Phantom.js to scrape the sites. And this should obviously be your last resort, not your first choice. Headless browsers are really fast compared to Internet Explorer or Safari, but they are really slow compared to running curl and grabbing the HTML or doing an API call. Okay, so typical implementations at academic and research libraries for federated search tend to run across certain pitfalls, and I'm going to describe one or two of them, but I'm going to do this pretty quickly, I hope. So here's the one that really bit us. We built a solution about like 6 or 8 years ago. I don't even know anymore. It was a long time ago. And it was going to be on our Drupal site, so of course we built a Drupal module for it that we'll go out and scrape our various sources, et cetera, or make the API calls and so on and so forth. So now, we did all this UX research, and we found that, oh, well, people don't need this metadata, they need that stuff, and we have these tabs that actually don't expose the results, they actually hide the results, and what we really want are just panels, buckets that just show everything all at once and let the user decide what the important parts are, and things like that. But in order to fix all of that, we would have to go and do it in Drupal because there's no external-facing API for the Drupal module. And so the tight coupling really prevents experimentation with other technologies that don't fit neatly into the Drupal paradigm, and that sucks. So a lot of that type of pitfall and all the other types of pitfalls, a lot of them can be avoided by following straightforward, sound software architecture principles, loose coupling, don't repeat yourself, all that stuff. But one thing should be uncontroversial, and that's this, that there is no programming language that has a more robust and widely understood set of conventions and tools for processing blobs of HTML than JavaScript. It's got DOM handling built right in. It's got a million battle-tested libraries with simple, powerful selector interfaces like jQuery-like things. Its sole reason for existing is the web and HTML. So we decided that it probably made sense to build our federated search server using Node.js. Or maybe even might be fun to take it a step further and ditch the server end of it entirely and just use Browserify, just package it all up and run it entirely in the browser. There's no need to talk to your server. If it's all JavaScript, why not? So the first thing we did is we wrote a pluggable and extensible federated search tool called Amalgamatic. Ta-da! This can be used on the server or in the browser with Browserify. We published it via NPM, so you just install it the way you install any NPM module. And I won't dwell too much on this, but here's basically how you would use it. You require Amalgamatic. You require a couple Amalgamatic plugins, which we'll get to in a second. You add those plugins to your Amalgamatic instance. You write a callback to deal with your data, and you do a search passing your search term and your callback. And it's first thing is an object, obviously, because you can do lots of things like specify more than just search terms. You can. Anyway, so those plugins, we wrote the ones that we needed to search the resources we were interested in. In the course of writing these plugins, we had to use all three of the techniques I described: the API calls, the straightforward scraping, and the spin up a headless browser and execute JavaScript so you can figure out what's going on. And all the plugins are published via NPM and they're tagged as Amalgamatic plugins, so that URL there lists all the plugins. Third, we used Amalgamatic to expose the federated search on our Node API server because that was, wanted to walk before we could run, before dealing with all the problems of cramming it entirely into the browser. We made an API. And then we just created a really straightforward prototype just to sort of like make sure it worked. And obligatory HTML5 API shout out to server sent events or event source. I know WebSockets get all the love, but event source / server sent events is just fantastic. If you don't know about it, look it up. It rules. It's one of the unsung, majestically awesome APIs, really powerful and simple, and it doesn't get the attention it deserves. It has really good browser support, and where it doesn't have browser support, it is, unlike WebSockets, completely possible to polyfill entirely, so that's awesome. Anyway, let's see, should I, so there's not going to be anything too surprising. No, that didn't work. Great, I clicked the link and it opens in the wrong window. That's okay though. We'll fly this over here. Whee! Okay, so, I search for cancer. And hey, that's not bad considering, excellent, okay. You get the idea. So, you want articles from PubMed, we got articles from PubMed. You don't know what that is, that's okay. I barely know myself and I work there. Okay, so moving along. Oh, that's too bad. I'll just have to make do, I guess. Yes, okay, here I am. Great. Then we just did the same thing, but we crammed everything into Browserify because we could. So there's no need for an intermediary search server. This is, opens up the possibility of packaging it as a, as a browser extension or a native app, or wrap it up in PhoneGap to make mobile app, that kind of thing. Anyway, a small caveat on the Browserified version. One thing the browser could not do that the API server could do was launch something like Phantom.js. So that's another reason why you really want your headless browser approach to be the last resort, not the first thing you run to. Right, so, and I'm going to see if this, so this is all running in the browser. There's no server, yada, yada. And so this also means that if somebody thinks this interface is terrible, and it is, it's very easy for them to make a new interface because there's, all the code is there. There's nothing to, there's no hidden API magic. So this is what the Browserify code looks like. I just wanted to point out our cheat in the, I guess it would be the third line there. So if, one of the reasons I was talking so fast with the Browserify stuff is because, of course, if you stop and think about it, the single source issue will bite you if you try to slurp in content from other domains. So what we did to get around that is we used a CORS proxy. Now, if you're using an API, if your Browserify plugin is calling an API that does CORS, then you don't need to do this. You just use it and it's great. But if the API does not do CORS, or if you're actually screen scraping HTML, then you want to use a CORS proxy so that you can insert the content into your DOM. We chose CORS Anywhere. There's a bunch of free CORS proxies out there. Yeah, just that's the cheat. And here's the code that does the search. This time, in the initial code I showed, we had a plugin that was just sent as the second option to Amalgamatic Search. Here, we're sending a plugin callback as an option. So the difference there is that the plugin callback gets called every time a plugin returns data. And the callback that gets sent into the as the second option search gets called when all the data returns. So if you use that, that gets called only, then the results are only displayed as soon as the slowest of your sources returns its data. So you might have 3 sources that return very quick and then a 4th that returns very slowly. So you probably don't want to do that. You probably want to do something more like this, where you can then inject the code, the content as soon as you have it. Okay. So yeah, so then you take that main.js, browserify it, woohoo, insert it into your HTML, and you're good to go. Now, I've been talking a lot about search, but the reason why I'm excited about this little thing, and I want is that I want to encourage people to think outside the box with it a little bit and get creative. Because really, it's not about search. It's about grabbing content that's not necessarily made readily available or in a machine-readable way. And so, but you can scrape anything. So you can basically take something that doesn't have an API and create your own API, like this thing. This is the, as you probably all know, the much maligned HTML5 DevConf online schedule. Now, I don't begrudge the conference anything about this schedule. This is a scrappy, can-do conference, and you know, last time I checked, I think tickets were like $60-something or $80-something, and you know, so it's run on a shoestring budget, and it's powered by volunteers, and fabulous. But you know, there are a lot of people complaining on Twitter and whatnot about the, you know, how terrible the schedule is and everything. And I thought to myself, if all the people complaining about the schedule would channel that effort towards fixing it, we'd be all set. So I went ahead and last night wrote an amalgamatic plugin for the HTML5 DevConf schedule, and I gave it a horrible name, as you can see. And the code just does some straightforward HTML scraping. So after I wrote the plugin, then I wrote a quick browserified page that just dumps all the content as JSON. So nope, that's not it. That's the source code. Yeah. So yeah, that's the thing. And then the demo is the next slide. There we go. Okay. So here's the entire schedule, and you know, we can like find my name. Hey, here's where we are, and we're in room E131, and it started at 5 o'clock Pacific Daylight Time, and so on and so forth. And I was really, really excited about this, and like, I can't wait to share this with all of my friends. So last night at around 11:30, I tweeted this, and I was like, yeah, somebody's gonna like, you know, make a really, really killer interface. And I thought maybe I should really do it, but it's kind of late, and I got to talk tomorrow night, so I'm not gonna do it. No, actually, it's also that I suck at doing things like that. Anyway. So I tweeted this out, and of course, it didn't happen. But, but you know, it was just before midnight yesterday, so the conference is already half over. And by the time people probably saw it today around lunch, you know, the conference was 3/4 over, and every hour that passed by, the value of creating this thing diminished. But you know, maybe next year I'll think of doing this a day ahead of the conference rather than halfway into it. So that's basically all I got. And you know, I'm happy to take questions. I'm also happy to go away, and I'm also happy to fire up MLB at bat for the next 3 minutes if anybody cares. But you probably have it on your phone if you care. Woo!